you wouldn't mind pressing record. Lovely, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. So if you don't already know me, my name is Casey Phillips and I'm the business manager for Sophos at TD SYNNEX. And today I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by the world famous speaker, John from Sophos. I'm going to continue to say this because he hates it.
I'm not sure I'm world famous. That's a gross exaggeration, but thank you anyway.
Who are you, John? Go on, introduce yourself.
Apparently I'm the world famous John Hope, senior technology evangelist at Sophos. So yeah, it's my pleasure to have been at Sophos since 2011, and yeah, I'm very enthusiastic about all things technology and all things cybersecurity. So I'm very much looking forward to today's grilling.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here and supporting us. So I guess firstly, thank you everyone for joining. We had the idea to come up with this sort of webinar, a little bit more of an informal style, just to debrief on the State of Ransomware report that is released by Sophos annually. So I personally think that this is one of Sophos's best kept secrets. So for me, really important to be able to bring this to our partner community today. So John and I are going to kind of run through some of those key elements in that report. We're happy to take any live questions. So if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat. And if they're relevant, we'll kind of pick them up as we go, or if not, we'll come back to them at the end. So I think without any further ado, let's just get straight into it. John, what is the State of Ransomware report? Give me the who's, the whys, the what's, the where's and the how's.
Sure thing. Okay, so the State of Ransomware report is something that we publish every year at Sophos, and it is essentially our way of finding out what it's like at the sharp end of cybersecurity. So what we want to do is really understand exactly what the threat landscape looks like, you know, who the victims are, how they're getting attacked, why they're getting attacked. And we do this through the survey which we conduct. And in order to make it as vendor agnostic as possible, we actually employ a third-party agency to select a bunch of IT decision makers, network admins, and budget holders worldwide, and we kind of select them at random. We don't really care how big the organization is, so there's everybody from 100 seats up to 5,000 seats in the survey, and we don't really care where they are. So there's 14 countries where we have respondents this time around, and there are 3,000 recipients. The one thing that we don't ask them about is we never ask them what they're doing about cybersecurity. So when you hear some of the statistics that we're going to go through in a short while, just do bear in mind that realistically, these people are probably not Sophos customers. That's obviously one of the key things to take away. So yeah, and this time around, there were 3,000 respondents. And as I said, they were selected at random, really, so we can find out what their experiences of cybersecurity are like.
Perfect. So what have we learned this year? What are those key takeaways that if I was to read the report, I'd be like, right, these are the key things?
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, it is a great report, first and foremost. It is freely available on the Sophos website, and it is customer facing as well. So for those of you who are listening and you're in the channel, then this is a great document that you can put in front of end users that are interested. But as you've rightly pointed out, Casey, there are 26 pages. There's quite a lot. So if I were to tell you what the highlights were, I think there are 4 really key statistics that are just super important that people ought to be aware of. The first of which is that 66% of organizations in that survey experienced at least one ransomware outbreak in the 12 months running up to the survey. So, you know, if you just digest that for a second, that means that 2 out of 3 organizations with a little bit of rounding experienced some kind of ransomware attack. And that tells us that ransomware is a significant problem. It's actually the same number as last year. So it tells us that ransomware continues to be a really significant challenge and a really significant problem. The next down the list is that of those attacks, 76% of them actually resulted in some kind of successful encryption of data. So the criminals managed to encrypt at least some, if not all, of the data they were actually after. And that troubles me a bit, because what that tells us is whatever cybersecurity products these organizations were using was obviously letting them down, because you kind of pin your hopes on whatever you've invested in to protect you from ransomware. And if 76% of those attacks land, it means it's not really working properly. And that number's actually gone up from 65%. So that tells us that the cyber criminals are actually getting better at encrypting data. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that we can probably explore a bit later on about why that is. So there's 2 statistics. The next 2, the fact that 46% of organizations that had their data encrypted then elected to pay the criminals off is really troubling for me as a cybersecurity practitioner, because what this tells us is that these organizations, they really felt that their best or their only option was to pay the criminals off and basically rely on their honesty, in inverted commas, to actually get the data back. So it tells us that these people were probably pretty desperate, and that is obviously not a great state of affairs. And then last but not least, the cost of ransomware. So the cost of ransomware, when you factor in things like reputational damage, loss of business opportunity, downtime, regulatory fines, everything excluding actually paying the ransom itself, the average cost of ransomware is now $1.82 million, which is just a crazy and eye-watering sum. And that again has gone up. That's gone up from 1.4 million last year. So ransomware is getting more expensive. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but one of the main ones is that, every year we rely more and more on IT systems and structures. And if those things start to fail, it cripples the business, because those technology attributes are really intrinsically linked into the business operation. So yeah, not particularly great picture, to be honest with you, when you add all those things together.
No, I totally agree. I was actually making some notes there, pen and paper, old school. It's quite dark, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So with that then, who are the targets?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm really glad as well that you used the word target, because there is still a belief in some quarters that ransomware is a random act, and it's really important to understand that it's not a random act. So the cyber criminals will typically investigate who their potential victims are. They will select them, and they will work out all sorts of things about the organization, including things like their ability to pay. So absolutely ransomware is targeted. And one of the key motivators for how a cyber criminal gang would elect to pick on a victim is looking at how much of a soft target they are. Because just like a legitimate business, these people are motivated by return on investment, right? So if they can find somewhere that's easy to get into, and or they have a lot of money, those are organizations that are typically more interesting than organizations that are tough to crack or have no ability to pay. So there is, and actually there's quite a disparity between different sectors, and it's worth exploring that. So remember, the baseline average is 66% of organizations getting hit by ransomware. But if you happen to be in education, upper and lower education, their likelihood is actually 80 and 79% respectively. So they are significantly more likely to be hit by ransomware. And I touched on some of the reasons. Those are primarily that actually transpires that education is a bit of an untapped resource for the cyber criminals in terms of the juicy data that's in the organization. If you've got kids at school, you've probably left them your bank details so you can pay for school dinners and trips. If there's a school minibus, then someone's got a driving license scan somewhere. And if the pupils are all going abroad, then there's probably passport scans somewhere. So there's a lot of interesting data before you even consider sensitive personal data like special education needs records and all that sort of stuff. So long story short, there's a lot of interesting data there. Education is unfortunately a sector which is typically underfunded, and as a result, they don't necessarily have as many people as they would need, and they don't have the top tier cybersecurity tools that they need. So you've got this kind of perfect storm of interesting target and actually pretty badly defended in sort of general terms. So that's kind of why cyber criminals have gravitated that way. Opposite end of the spectrum, the sectors that are least likely to get hit by ransomware, the primary one is actually kind of, I'll bundle it into, call it high technology, but we're talking about IT companies, software development companies, communications companies, all those kind of tech industries. And those are organizations that typically take cybersecurity very seriously and have the highest budgets. And as a result, they're effectively the best defended. So it presents quite a challenging target for the cyber criminals. And I'm not even saying they get an easy ride of it, because even in that sector, 50% of organizations experienced a ransomware attack. So that's 1 in 2 as opposed to 2 in 3. It's still not great odds, but there is quite a statistical deviation between the two things there. So this tells us a lot about how the cyber criminals pick their victims by sector. Interestingly, when you look at organization size, there's no real correlation between the number of employees that you have and the likelihood of getting hit by ransomware, but there is a distinct correlation between your company turnover. So essentially the cyber criminals are going after the money. So there's 2 really key indicators that we know the cyber criminals are targeted in what they do.
So it's just either really bad or slightly less bad.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Got you. I'm a victim. What does that actually look like for a school or, you know, any of these companies? What is it like to be in the shoes of a victim of ransomware?
It's supposed to say ransomware is painful, first and foremost. So we asked our respondents if they experienced some kind of financial loss, and 84% of organizations said that they got hit by ransomware and experienced a financial loss. I struggle to understand how that number is not 100%, because I don't really understand how you can be hit by ransomware and it not cause some kind of financial impact. But nevertheless, that's what the statistics say. Your actual experience of being hit by ransomware is going to depend quite dramatically on who you are as an organization. So the cyber criminals, I touched on this, they will work out what your ability to pay looks like. And they know that if you set an unrealistic ransom demand, that it's going to turn the victim off straight away, and they'll just walk away. You know, if we experience an ransomware attack at somewhere like Mrs. Miggin's Bakery with 3 employees, then they're not going to pay $1 million. It just doesn't add up. But conversely, they don't want to leave money on the table either. So they also don't lowball ransom demands. They work out very precisely what your ability to pay looks like and leverage a demand accordingly. To the point, in one incident that we were investigating as a rapid response engagement, the organization got hit by a ransom demand of £950,000, and they turned around to the cyber criminals and said, look, guys, we're a small manufacturing company, we don't have the resources to pay that. And they actually emailed back a copy of their cybersecurity insurance document, which they had stolen from the network, that actually showed they were insured to the tune of £1 million. And the basic defense was, well, look, you're insured for $1 million, so 950,000 is actually perfectly achievable for you. So that's the kind of level of people that we're talking about here, that they are that sort of precisely focused.
Wow. Okay. So I think, so you said earlier, 46% of these attacks result in payment to the criminals.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about paying, what is best for business? There's a moral, ethical debate here, isn't there, around paying?
There certainly is. And look, it's really easy for me to turn around, you know, because this is a hypothetical situation, say, absolutely, you should not pay the cyber criminals off. But I am not the person sitting in a hospital where doctors can't access patient records, or I'm not sitting in a factory that's idle because the machines can't make stuff because the templates have been encrypted. So, you know, it's super easy when it's hypothetical to say no, and the realities are somewhat different. But there are a couple of things that we should probably caution people against when it comes to paying the cyber criminals off. The first is, you touched on the moral ethical argument. You know, whether it's better for business in the short term or not, you could debate that, but certainly in the long term, what we know categorically is that you are effectively perpetuating a problem by paying the cyber criminals off. You know, we are encouraging and endorsing this behavior, and it will just continue. If everybody stopped paying the ransom tomorrow, then ransomware would be dead by next week, because there's no point for the criminals doing it if they're not going to get any money. So yeah, there is a social impact by paying the cyber criminals off. Interestingly as well, the actual return on investment and what you get by paying the cyber criminals off probably isn't as great as you might think. There is this sort of idea that paying the criminals off is the quickest way to get back up and running. And that's not really true, because they give you a bunch of decryption tools that may or may not work, and there's a lot of effort involved in it. On average, you get about 60% of your data back that way. You know, there are some outlying gangs that have no intention of actually giving you the data back at all, and it's a pure scam. But in most cases, the criminals will try, but they always put their effort into encrypting the data rather than giving it you back again afterwards. So, you know, your mileage is going to vary on what you actually get back. That's an important thing to know. And then on top of that, you've got the problem that if you pay the criminals off, that you may well end up on a sucker list, as it's delightfully called, where you just get more and more ransomware. So the cyber criminals potentially operate effectively a CRM system where they know this organization is weak and vulnerable and will continue to attack and continue to attack. So a better option, if it's possible, is to restore using backups. Backups are typically quicker to get you back up and running. And also, it's considerably less expensive. So the average cost of recovery is about half if you use a backup as opposed to paying the criminals off. So if you can avoid paying the criminals off, there's a lot of good reasons why you probably shouldn't be paying the criminals off.
Okay, thanks, John. Why is ransomware so prolific and successful, I guess, for the criminals?
Okay, so the prime motivation, let's be absolutely clear, when it comes to ransomware and the cyber criminal gangs, is to make money. And a few years ago, the ability to infiltrate an organization and encrypt data came along at a time when also cryptocurrency was available. And the two things coming together have really made ransomware very, very popular, because the question is, if you hit a victim, how do you cash out on that? How do you get the money back? And obviously what you can't do is you can't put a ransom demand that says, here's my bank account and sort code, because it's really easy to trace, right? Whereas if you use cryptocurrency, in theory, it is somewhat anonymous. And, you know, there's this whole interesting field now of effectively following the cyber criminals and finding out where the money's gone. Because if you can trace, you know, the crypto exchanges where you turn this crypto money into actual currency, if you can work it backwards and, you know, find out how that ill-gotten gain are being laundered and turned into semi-legitimate money, then actually the whole thing unravels quite quickly. But nevertheless, because of the way these exchanges work and the jurisdictions that some of them operate in, it's pretty easy at the moment to remain under the radar. So effectively, cryptocurrency has given the cyber criminals a way to cash out really quickly when they find a victim. So that's kind of why ransomware exists in the first place, why it's more prolific now than it's ever been before. There's really a kind of perfect storm of three things that are happening in the world of cybersecurity all at the same time. The first is that the cyber criminals are getting more effective at being able to create ransomware, and their malware is getting more sophisticated. So if you think back to those headline stats, 76% of encryptions being successful now, as opposed to 65 last year, is a really good indicator that that's happening. And then one of the main reasons for that is that we all know human beings, they typically learn better in groups. And ransomware is now almost exclusively delivered by highly sophisticated, highly organized criminal gangs. And one of the side effects of criminals coalescing into gangs is they can all learn off each other really quickly. So it's accelerated the pace of ransomware and malware development, because they can talk to each other, they can have forums and figure stuff out really quickly. So you've got more sophisticated malware, you've got more sophisticated ransomware. On top of that, you've got the social aspect. So, you know, despite the stats, we are all collectively getting better at protecting our networks to an extent. The problem is that human beings then become the weak spot. And social engineering is getting much more sophisticated from cyber criminals. You know, we all pretty much know now that we haven't just had a rich uncle pass away and there isn't $1 million waiting for us in this bank account. But that's not really how phishing looks in the real world now. Cyber criminals, because they will invest time and effort into working out who the victims are, they will construct phishing attacks that are super relevant to that individual and their situation. And we kind of make it easy, unfortunately, for the criminals in some respects, because we all love to post things on social media and LinkedIn and all that sort of thing. And all those little nuggets of information are actually nuggets the criminals can then turn around and use against you. So I'll give you another example, another rapid response engagement that we had. The CEO of this organization was very specifically targeted, and they worked out who the CEO was, probably by going on Companies House or looking on LinkedIn or going to the company website. So you know who you're dealing with, first of all, and then you hop onto their social media, you work out that this particular individual plays golf and this is their golf club, and then there's an event on at this particular golf club. So the criminals in this scenario took a bit of a punt, and they basically sent out a form saying this is the catering details for this particular event, and lo and behold, this individual was actually responsible for catering. So there was a bit of luck there, to be honest, but because that fitted that individual's reality of, yeah, I play golf here, yeah, there's an event on, yeah, I'm doing the catering, click on the form, you can imagine what happens next. So we kind of make it easy for those kind of examples. And another example is, you think about if you're advertising a job in IT and you turn around and say, I need skills in this bit of software and this type of hardware, you're kind of giving the criminals a bit of a hit list of things you've got in your estate. So even the information that you share for the most legitimate and innocent reasons can be turned around and used against you. So that's your second problem. And then the third problem is the crims have really changed tactics. There's a lot now of what's called living off the land. And this is where the criminals will actually, instead of actually launching a lot of malware, they will often use our own legitimate admin tools against us. So things like PowerShell, things like remote desktop services is just a couple of really simple examples of stuff we use every day that the crims can use against us. And technology really struggles at this point because it's very difficult for technology to contextualize and understand what is likely to be legitimate use versus the criminals using those legitimate tools and stuff against us. So you've got this sort of trilogy of things that causes real headaches for cybersecurity right now.
A lot again to take in. Fantastic, thank you, John. So if we just take a bit of a sidestep then into the Sophos portfolio, what are Sophos doing to combat this huge problem?
A lot. I mean, there's a huge amount. I mean, obviously, we're very focused on ransomware because it is the biggest problem that exists right now. So if I talk about the three challenges again, but we'll talk about that in context of what we're doing in the portfolio, the more sophisticated malware, well, obviously, InterceptX has the world's best artificial intelligence that can detect new and unknown threats. You've got the CryptoGuard feature, which is, we don't really want to use CryptoGuard, but it's a very good way of detecting if encryption has happened. So it's kind of like a last line of defense. If we see encryption happening, we can stop it and put it back. So you've got those aspects. You've got things like synchronized security, where endpoints and firewalls are working together to pin down threats. And that helps enormously with the kind of pace of malware development and the pace of deployment of malware. The social aspect is a bit more challenging because you can't just deploy technology to patch human temptation, let's say. We're all ultimately emotional beings, and I would challenge anyone on the call that under the right circumstances you'll probably fall for it and click on the links and do the wrong things, because that's just life. We can, however, use a tool called Phish Threat, which is in the Sophos portfolio. This is a tool that's designed so that administrators can simulate phishing against their own users and see how their security readiness looks like, and then teach the users if they click on the bad things. It's not about punishing them. It is instead about showing them, or you clicked on this link and did you hover over it with the mouse and realize actually the domain was dodgy, or have you interacted with this in the wrong way, all those kind of things. So trying to make a situation, a culture that develops where people don't sort of automatically click on the links and they question everything. So that can help a long way with the human element. The really interesting challenge actually out of all of these is the last one, however, which is the legitimate tools used against us. This is another human problem in its own right. This is something that technology can't solve. I've already talked about the fact that using our own services and tools against us is really hard for tech. What you need is people. You need people to monitor the estate, look at the telemetry, see what's going on inside the organization, and then respond accordingly before it becomes a real problem. And we do two things here. So we've got XDR, which gives customers that have a security operations division of their own, we give them tools so they can perform those threat hunts and find those things. But most organizations don't fall into that category. They don't have round the clock expertise on cybersecurity. So what happens in that scenario is we offer our MDR service, managed detection and response. And what this is doing is hoovering up the telemetry from the customer's estate, whether it be Sophos or whether it be a mixture of other products as well. And then we hoover up all that telemetry, we look for the interesting events, we investigate, and if we see problems that we think require intervention, we can either actually intervene ourselves and just fix the problem, or we can call the customer and work with them, call the channel partner, work with them. But essentially, this is buying into a security operations center and then getting better security outcomes by outsourcing that human-led threat hunting. And that's the most effective way of stopping all of these problems, because it transcends the technology and it fills in the inadequacies that technology kind of inherently has.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you, John. So then I guess if we take another side step, so we've looked at the criminals, we've looked at Sophos. If we now take a step into the partners' shoes, what should our partners and the people on this call now, what should they be doing to protect their end users, and what are we seeing from other partners that's working really well?
Okay, I mean, that's a great question. There's a lot of things, and actually a lot of them involving helping your customer do the basics. They will almost inevitably look to you as a channel partner as being their trusted advisor, because you understand IT and this is your sphere. So encouraging your customers to do the basics is super important. Before we even get bogged down in these latest generation of attacks, just doing the basics like having multi-factor authentication, having good IT policies and good structures is super important. A lot of these attacks rely on vulnerabilities on endpoint machines, so just patching and keeping software up to date and all that sort of thing is really important. important. And also checking the configs over. So if you've deployed Sophos, or to be honest, if you've deployed any kind of cybersecurity solution in a customer environment, it's one thing to install it, but these things require constant maintenance and updating, both in terms of the software releases, but also updating in terms of the policies and the rules you've got in place, making sure it's all fit for purpose and the user hasn't done something stupid like disabled one of the critical protection factors. So things like health checks, that's a great way of making sure that customer environments are safe. These things are a good idea. And then on top of there, then it's then considering, well, I've just told you that you need human beings to look at the problem. So have a look at the services potentially that you do offer or you could be offering and think, well, have you got a security desk that could be helping your customers? In which case, maybe you need some tools to make that desk more effective. Or could you be reselling MDR so that your customers getting world-class cybersecurity without you as a channel partner really having to do much in terms of investment? It's a quite compelling package actually when you look at it from that perspective. But yeah, guiding customers through the threat landscape really, and making sure they're doing the basics right. And then how do we bolster the protection? How do we build on the protection that they've already got in place is going to get you some really good wins.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So at this point, I would like to open up to live Q&A. So if you've got any questions to our listeners, please either send them to me directly or pop them in the chat. And equally, if you'd like to ask John yourselves, I have the ability to unmute you if you would like to come on audio and ask a question yourself. So John, the first question that I have got from one of our partners is, what are your comments on SMBs as a target for ransomware? We see all the big names in the news, but what about the SMBs?
Yeah, you kind of end up with this slightly weird bias actually, because if you look at the news and you look at the headlines, then you're absolutely right. You don't get news headlines that say, oh, the Acme Sprocket company with 50 users just got hit, because it's not exciting. But you do see really big names like hotel groups, banks, public sector organizations. And it kind of leads to this bias that makes you think that ransomware is exclusively an enterprise level problem. And unfortunately, reality is that it's not. We've talked a lot about the cyber criminals in the context of them being organized, structured groups. And one of the other things that has changed is that you kind of end up leveraging a bit of economies of scale here. So in the old days, in the early days of ransomware, then it really was more of an enterprise level problem, because it took a lot of effort for the cyber criminals to work out who the victim is, get them on the hook, launch the ransomware, cash out. These are all challenging things. But as ransomware has kind of developed into this industry, all of a sudden the barriers to entry to that industry are much lower. So what you're seeing is organizations being hit that traditionally wouldn't have been key targets. Organizations that maybe just don't have an ability to pay because of funding constraints, particularly public sector. All of a sudden, if the cyber criminals know they can cash out, but cash out at a lower value, they're not putting the effort in the first place. So they become a viable target because it's easier to attack them. And then the same is also true of SMBs, right? So clearly an SMB does not have the same financial well-being as a bigger organization. And you're not going to get the same level of return by attacking an SMB. But if you're actually putting less effort in to start with, then that kind of works for cyber criminals. So we are seeing ransomware working its way down the food chain a little bit. So as much as your likelihood of getting hit by ransomware is higher if you're a higher turnover organization, there is also a trend that tells us that smaller organizations are becoming increasingly popular targets. And particularly as well, because the cyber criminals know that they are not going to be typically the best defended organizations. This same concept of, if you're going to stand up a cybersecurity operations center of your own, that's a high barrier, and you're going to have to be a big organization to do that. MDR changes that conversation completely, because all of a sudden an SMB can have world-class level of defense. But that's an aside. Essentially, at the moment, where many SMBs don't have the resources and maybe haven't invested in a service of that nature, they're soft targets that the criminals can cash out on now. So yeah, SMBs are unfortunately a really popular target, and consistently organizations get hit and they're super surprised. They think, well, I'm just this small company. Why have I become a victim? And it's simply because it's easy for the criminals to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, so the follow-on question to that is then, how do we sell these services to SMB customers where they don't have the IT budgets of the large enterprises?
Okay, so there's a combination of things that have to happen here. The first is an education piece. You know, there is still so many small, medium enterprise organizations that just don't think that they're going to be a target, you know, because they're not interesting, they're not exciting, and they don't have huge financial resources. So there's an education piece that goes alongside of you need to take this problem seriously, effectively, and you need to give it due consideration. And then the next step down the line is, well, let's have a look at how we structure this up and how you can achieve 24/7 threat hunting if that's the product that you and the service that you're going to sell. You know, and then it's a cost comparison, right? So if you're going to go and hire a couple of analysts at, let's say, 70,000, 80,000 pounds a year, does that look realistic to you? And the answer is probably no. So all of a sudden, MDR immediately becomes a much more compelling conversation because they can get the same security result but not with the investment and not running it in-house. So you've got that aspect to talk about. The other thing is there's a surprisingly large amount of return on investment conversations that you can have around having MDR services. And to be honest, if you just slap a customer with a quote, then your chances of success will probably vary, but will reasonably be low because they're used to renewing, from their perspective, antivirus and cybersecurity at this price, and all of a sudden you're suggesting that this service is coming along and it's much more expensive. But it's quite easy to message that delta between the two things when you start to consider what your return on investment might be. So a really easy win is, do you have cyber insurance? And if you do have cyber insurance, what's your premium? Because the cyber insurers will look at the risk factors associated with the organization and will leverage a premium accordingly. In the same way that if you go and drive a super fast car, or you have a really bad track record of driving, you're a high risk and your premiums go up, right? So by having MDR as an organization, you are reducing your risk profile because the cyber insurers are really happy that somebody is looking at your estate 24 hours a day and you've got experts that can help you. So the risk goes down, the premium goes down. All of a sudden, you've saved some money there that you can offset against the MDR services, for example. And then you can look at, well, how much time is spent with IT right now? How long are they spending cleaning up threats, checking their estate over and doing human threat hunting, all this sort of stuff? Because if you're having the MDR service, you can probably offset some of that time and that can free IT up to go and do other tasks. So there might be a business transformation project. There might be something that you've got on the back burner and you're never doing it because IT are constantly firefighting. Take that pressure away, and all of a sudden they could be doing those things that will actually move the business forward in a productive way. So those are some good examples. To be honest, one of the best ways that we have seen to help customers sort of bridge that gap is to actually show them the case studies. The challenge, I guess, with cybersecurity as a service is you can't really have a trial. In the same way that if you're buying a product, you could test it, you could see what it's like, but with a service you can't really do that. So what you need is the testimony and the experiences of other people in the same boat as you that have invested in this service and the positive outcomes that they've experienced. And what I would suggest to all the channel partners out there is, if you can find a case study that kind of mirrors as closely as possible your prospect, that's more compelling because people want to hear about other people in the same sort of situations. We've even had situations at Sophos where an existing MDR customer has taken time out of their day very kindly to go and speak to prospects, and those conversations are super compelling. So anything you can do to help a customer empathize with somebody that's already invested in this and to hear firsthand what those benefits are, those things are really positive.
Amazing. Okay, the last question that I've received then is, I sell another vendor's firewalls. How would I realistically start to offer Sophos to my customers?
Okay, that's absolutely fine. So obviously we would love it if everybody had Sophos front to back everywhere and all resellers only ever sold Sophos. That would be great, but that isn't always a reality. If you're a channel partner, you may have made a strategic decision that there are other products that you want to be selling and working with, and the end user may also have invested in other products already, and they may be midway through renewal cycles and all that sort of stuff. So the first thing is, let's have a conversation first of all, because if that firewall is up for renewal and it's not doing the thing it should be doing, then maybe actually the Sophos firewall might be a better proposition for a whole bunch of reasons. So we shouldn't shy away from having that displacement conversation. But in a lot of cases, like I said, there may be compelling reasons why that isn't going to happen. So our mitigation to that is the fact, and I did touch on this ever so briefly, is that we can also take telemetry from a bunch of third-party sources as well. So whilst our MDR service will collect telemetry from our own Sophos portfolio, as you would expect, we do also have a very large number of integrations that allow us to then pull telemetry from other cybersecurity products. And that allows us to work with the customer environment, and it allows us to work with the channel ecosystem as well. So, if you, the example that came up there was, I've sold another vendor's firewall. Well, that's fine. Let's have a look. Is it on the integrations list? And if it is, we can very easily take the telemetry that firewall is generating and feed it into our MDR service. And that gives two really distinct benefits. The first is obviously better cybersecurity outcomes, because our MDR desk are then not only looking at the telemetry that's coming from the Sophos estate, but also from all these other catch points along the way as well. So we're getting a much more broad picture of the customer environment. So the customer gets a better result by having this diverse and rich set of telemetry. But it also unlocks a better return on investment on the things that the customer's already bought. So I don't know, which firewall vendor this particular individual is talking about, but let's, say for argument's sake, it's Fortinet. Then they've bought Fortinet appliance, and that's great. And let's be honest, their firewalls are good, and it's probably giving them a good level of security, but they're not getting the best out of that product if they are not looking at the logs, reports, and the data that firewall is producing. So they've made an investment, but they're not getting the most out of it. Whereas if you then hook that into MDR, then we are looking at the logs, we are looking at the alerts, we are looking at the telemetry, and the customer's going to get better returns on the things they've already bought as well. So again, a really nice positive message about working with other vendors' firewalls. And that story transcends as well other disciplines. So things like email, public cloud, identity. I mean, Microsoft estate is probably the big one, right? Because almost everybody is going to have some kind of Microsoft technology somewhere on the line, and we actually integrate with that so we can get the interesting telemetry and data from those environments too. So we're very positive about this idea of bringing in telemetry from other places as well. We shouldn't default to selling that. We should be having conversations about why Sophos is better. But if we're not going to get over that barrier, then let's just work with what we've got and get the best for the customer, and get the best for the channel partner as well, because obviously it's all about results. And your customer, if they're in a support contract, they're much more likely to renew with you if they haven't had a security breach. Let's be blunt about it. So working with what we've got does lead to a lot of positive outcomes.
Brilliant. Thank you. So this is, I guess, the last call. If we've got time for one more question, if anyone wants to quickly chuck something in the chat. Oh, was that one that just appeared? Oh, there we go. I am a Microsoft house. Can you provide more detail on why Sophos can assist on my, I guess that's Defender for Endpoint estate?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Microsoft is ever present in customer environments, as I've just talked about, and maybe the security aspect is becoming more and more prevalent in customer environments as well. And we could argue till the cows come home about why we're better about security, but Microsoft, they have a huge economies of scale. They are very supportive of certain sectors. That means the price is pretty low. So it's quite hard to argue against that when you're looking at a purely financial decision. So what we can do is, as I've mentioned, is we can work alongside that particular security technology. I mean, Microsoft, you dismiss them at your peril now. They're decent at security. Their biggest challenge really is the fact that there are multiple different dashboards that you have to log into, and it can be quite difficult to manage, and it can be really difficult to start doing threat hunts because you've got this kind of disparate array of multiple dashboards. And by deploying our MDR service to layer on top of Microsoft, what you're doing is you're taking a lot of that problem away, because we will monitor the telemetry. We will look at what Microsoft is doing. We also can put our own detection agent in as well in certain environments. So where Microsoft might have missed something, we potentially have that capability to detect. We won't interfere because you've obviously really got to have one security technology actually doing the proactive blocking, but we can use our agent to hoover up telemetry of things that we think are suspicious that maybe Microsoft don't have that full depth into. And again, that goes into our MDR desk. We respond accordingly. So you can sort of get away with having a slightly cheaper endpoint estate by having Microsoft, but then layering the service on it, so you're still getting the good positive security outcomes. So taking that management burden away, making it more streamlined, and still giving the better security outcomes by being able to do that investigation it's not a bad combination, to be honest. Obviously, we would prefer InterceptX, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why InterceptX is better. But if that's what you're going to have to do, then it's quite complementary to add that service around.
Perfect. Oh, maybe a sneaky one last question from John here. So as a Microsoft partner, the complementary play is good. What collateral does Sophos have for me to get more skilled up on this that I can share with my customers?
Yeah, we've got a great question. So that is absolutely something that we are working on. So there is a whole new product message that comes around the integration with Microsoft. So talk to your channel account managers and keep an eye on the partner portal, because there is a distinct shift in our go-to-market for Microsoft environments that articulates pretty much what I've just said there about how we can work alongside that existing estate, how we can make the outcomes from that estate better. So it's not so much a technology rewrap, but it's more of a positioning remap of how we can complement Microsoft. And there's a very specific targeted messages that are coming down the line about how we can work alongside Microsoft to give better security outcomes. So yeah, that is definitely something to keep an eye on, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that very soon indeed.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think that brings us nicely to a close. So thank you very much for your questions. I hope you enjoyed the session, and thank you very much for dedicating the time to join it. I hope it's provoked some thoughts for you, and will be a nice conversation starter for some of your customer conversations coming up in the coming days and weeks. So please reach out to me directly, or your Sophos CAM or your BDM at TD for any support or any questions that have come up following this webinar. We'll be more than happy to support you. Matthew has popped the link into the report if you do feel like you want to go back and fact check some of those stats that we've shared, or just have another read of it, because as we say, it's definitely one of those best kept secrets. So thank you very much for joining, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all, and take care.